Hello everyone, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We are continuing to learn Hilchos Megillah. We'll be learning today Mitzvah Hashem, Daf Kuf Nun Daled Amud Aleph. We pick up on Kuf Nun Gimel Amud Beis, Siman Taf Reish Pei Tes, Sif Daled. We are continuing to learn the halachas of Mikra Megillah. It says the Mechaber Sif Daled, Hashemea Megillah Mimisha Hu Mudar Hanami Menu Yotza. If you hear the Megillah from somebody about whom you have made a neder, you have made a vow, a neder, that you will not derive any benefit from that person. So a person has the ability, using his speech, this is another indication of the great power of speech in the Torah HaKadoshah, a person has the ability, using his speech, to go ahead and make something that is otherwise permissible to him prohibited. So, a very basic example. Somebody could turn around and somebody could say, this cup should be usher to me. Now, what does it mean it should be usher? What he has to do is he has to attach to this item that he wants to usher on himself, he attaches to it a level of kedusha. So, for example, a person says, this cup should be to me like a carbon. Well, it doesn't become kadosh, it doesn't become sanctified as a carbon, but we know that you're not allowed to derive benefit from something that belongs to Hegdish. That would be an isser of Me'ilah. So when somebody says that the cup should be to him like a carbon, that's a way of saying that I should be forbidden to derive benefit from this cup. That's what the person is saying. Now, let's say Ruvain said, I should be prohibited from deriving any benefit from Shimon. So he says, Kainem hanas Shimon alai. The benefit that I could possibly derive from Shimon, or the pleasure that I could possibly derive from Shimon, should be forbidden to me as a carbon. So now he has prohibited himself from deriving any benefit from Shimon by way of a neder. So now the question becomes, okay, could Shimon lane the Megillah for him? On face value, if Shimon lanes the Megillah for Ruvain, certainly he has benefited Ruvain. Ruvain has a chiyuv of Mikra Megillah. Shimon went ahead and laned for him, and he helped him be Yaitza the mitzvah. So on the one hand, that certainly sounds like Ruvain deriving benefit from Shimon. Yet the Mechaber says it's not a problem. Hashemea Megillah mimisha hu mudar hanami menu. If somebody hears the laning of the Megillah from somebody who he's prohibited to derive benefit from, Yotza, he is Yaitza the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. Let's see the Mishnah Berurah Ois Katan Yud Daled. The Mishnah Berurah explains this is because of the very well-known concept, the mitzvahs lav lehanois nitnu. We do not look at your fulfillment of a mitzvah as a hana. You don't get hana, so to speak, from fulfilling a mitzvah. The Rabbeinu Shalom did not give you mitzvahs for your pleasure, for your hana. The Rabbeinu Shalom gave you a Torah HaKadoshah, and you have obligations. The Torah obligates you to hear the Megillah. So when you hear the Megillah, you're fulfilling an obligation. Gzeres HaMelech. You're not deriving hana. You're not deriving pleasure. The mitzvahs lav lehanois nitnu. The mitzvahs were not given to you for your pleasure. That's not what they are. They're gzeres hamelech. V'loy mikri hana. And that is not called hana. V'agin le'el siman tavkov pei tes siv zayin d'shayich le'inyanenu. The Chavetz Chaim sends us back to siman tavkov pei tes siv zayin, which is Hilchos Rosh Hashanah, that's referring to Hilchos Shofar. This is something that we learned already together, and he says that the halacha that we see over there is shaykh over here as well. So let's take a look at Dirshu footnote number 28. Sham kasav hashulchan aruch din zel in Yitiki HaShofar. Over there, in Siman Tavkuf Pei Tes Siv Zayin, the Mechaber writes the same halacha in the context of Hilchos Shofar. What does he say? He says, what happens if Ruvain made a neder prohibiting himself from getting any hana from Shimon? And now Shimon blows shofar for Ruvain. Could Ruvain be Yaitza the mitzvah of shofar by having Shimon blow for him? And the Mechaber says yes. If Shimon blows for Ruvain, Ruvain is Yaitza. Why? Same reason as what we have here. Mitzvah slavle hanois nitnu, and the fact that Reuven is hearing shofar from Shimon, that does not constitute a prohibited form of hana. Instead, it's just Reuven being mekayim his Torah obligation to hear shofar. However, the mechaber over there in Hilchos Shofar continues and makes an exception. Continues the footnote for Hoisif. Over there in Siman Tavkuf Peites, the mechaber adds, she'im bikesh beferish mimishahu muder mimenu hana sheyiska avura. Let's say Reuven goes to Shimon and asks Shimon, please blow shofar for me. In that case, says the mechaber, aser. In that case, it's aser. Why is it aser? So the Mishnah Berurah explains over there, there's a very big difference. Again, case number one, what does the mechaber say is okay? Reuven has to hear shofar. Shimon comes along. Shimon says, oh, Reuven, you need to hear shofar. I saw you weren't in shul this morning. You need to hear shofar. I have a shofar. Come, I'll blow for you. And he blows shofar. Okay? That doesn't constitute a hana. Mitzvah slavle hanis nitnu, and Reuven is yaitza. But the mechaber says, what if Reuven meets Shimon, and Reuven says, Shimon, could you do me a favor and could you blow shofar for me? Shimon says, sure. Shimon blows shofar for Reuven. Now Reuven is not yaitza. Why? What's the difference between the two? Again, in the first case, Reuven never asked Shimon to do it. Shimon volunteered. Shimon did it on his own. In the second case, Reuven asked Shimon to do it. In the first case, we say Mitzvah slavle hanos nitnu. The fact that Reuven heard shofar from Shimon and was thereby yotzei the mitzvah of shofar doesn't constitute a prohibited hana. But if Reuven asks Shimon to blow for him, then that does constitute a prohibited hana, and he's not yotzei the mitzvah. Why? So continues the footnote here. The Mishnah Berurah in Tavkuf Peites explains the difference. And he says that in the second case, Shenene b'ma shekiem ritzoinoi va'asa es shlichusai. In the second case, the reason it's problematic is not because Reuven being yotzei the mitzvah of shofar constitutes a forbidden hana. In the second case, the problem is that when Shimon acquiesces to Reuven's request and Shimon agrees to do the favor for Reuven, that's a hana for Reuven. It doesn't matter if Reuven asked Shimon to blow shofar for him or Reuven asked Shimon to slice a piece of cake for him. Either way, if Reuven asks Shimon to do something for him and Shimon agrees to go ahead and do that thing, that is a prohibited hana for Reuven. And therefore, in Tavkuf Peites, the mechaber says you're not allowed to do. Now, having said that you're not allowed to do it, I believe the halacha over there is that b'di'eved, you are yotzei. You see, what the mechaber says in Tavkuf Peites is like this: Hamuder ana mechaveroi muter luskaya lo'tkiya shel mitzvah. If Reuven has a neder, he's not allowed to get any benefit from Shimon. Shimon is allowed to blow shofar for Reuven, and Reuven is yaitza. Why? Because, like the Mishnah Berurah says over there, and I cut your base, because Mrs. Lavla Hanis didn't know. It's not a problem. Continues the mechaber over there. Aval, however, im amar loy hamuder. If Reuven, the one who is muder hana from Shimon, says to Shimon, Teka, blow shofar for me, v'hoitzieni, and be moitzi me with the mitzvah, then the mechaber says aser, that's prohibited. Says the Mishnah Berurah over there, and I was cutting your dalid, that's aser, the kevan de b'shlichusei avid, because now, since Shimon is acquiescing to do the shlichus of Reuven, yesh lahana b'may da'avid shlichusei. Now Reuven is deriving pleasure, he's deriving benefit, not from the tikiyah shofar specifically, but from the fact that Shimon acquiesced to do something for him, and therefore it's aser. However, ub'di'eved yotza. But b'di'eved, Reuven is yotzei the mitzvah of shofar, because again, the blowing of the shofar is not prohibited for Reuven. Hearing the sound of the shofar is not prohibited. What's prohibited is the fact that he acquiesced to do me a favor. That's why limudHaTorah it's aser. LimudHaTorah Shimon should not blow for Ruvain if Ruvain asked him to. But b'diavad, if Shimon did blow for Ruvain, Ruvain heard kol shofar, he's yaitza the mitzvah. Says the Mishnah Berurah by us that you should know this halacha is neged to over here by Hilchos Megillah as well, and that is that here in Hilchos Megillah, the Mechaber tells us yes, if you heard shofar from somebody that you were mudar hana from, you're yaitza the mitzvah, and he's allowed to lane for you, and you're allowed to listen to his laning. He's the shliach tzibur. You could go to shul and you could hear his laning. Somebody says, "Wait a second, aren't you mudar hana from the shliach tzibur?" That's okay. Mrs. Lavlanis didn't know. Not a problem. But you're not allowed to go ask him to blow for you. Now, if you did ask him to go blow for you, you aren't allowed to, you're not allowed to go ask him to lane Megillah for you. But if you did ask him to lane Megillah, and he acquiesced, and he laned the Megillah for you, b'diavad, you are yoitza. Okay. Now we go to Sif Hey. Koftan Gimel Amid Beis, Mechaber, Sif Hey, 2 lines to the bottom. Very interesting halacha that I believe most people don't even know that there is such a concept. Says the Mechaber, Mokaim she'ein minyan. Let's say you're in a place where you don't have a minyan for Mikra Megillah. Im echad yodeya, if there's one person who knows how to lane, v'ha'acherim einam yodim, and the rest of them don't know how to lane the Megillah, echad paiter es kulam. So the Baal Koreh, the one who knows how to lane, he'll lane, and he could be mitzi everybody else. But, says the Mechaber, v'im kulam yodim. How about if there are 8 people, and they all know how to lane by themselves? Or 6 of them know how to lane by themselves. V'im kulam yodim, if they all know how to lane the Megillah, kol echad koreh la'atzmai, they should all lane for themselves. So again, says the Mechaber, if you have a minyan, then one person could lane Megillah and be mitzi everybody else. If you don't have a minyan, then it depends. If one of them is a bucky, if one of them is a Baal Koreh who knows how to lane, and the rest of them do not know how to lane, then the bucky, the one who knows how to lane, can be mitzi the others. But if they're all bekiyim, if they all know how to lane, then they should all lane on their own. One should not be mitzi the rest. Why? Let's take a look here at the Mishnah Berurah. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Tes Vav. La'atzmai, if you don't have a minyan, and the others know how to lane for themselves, it's better, says the Mechaber, they should lane for themselves. Why? De'ein ha'yachid mitzi chaveroi ela ba'asara. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this idea that one person could be mitzi other people with Mikra Megillah, that's only if you have 10 people. Or if you have no choice because only one knows how to lane and the rest of them do not know how to lane. But if you don't have 10 people and everybody knows how to lane, then one isn't mitzi anybody else. Everybody has to lane on their own. De'ein ha'yachid mitzi chaveroi ela ba'asara. This idea that one could be mitzi others, that's only if you have 10 people. If you have less than 10 people, you can't do that. Continues. Now, to us, this is very strange. So, the Chavetz Chaim right away heads off our question. V'lo yidamelu shofar. This is not similar to a mitzvah like shofar, where, even if you know how to blow shofar, somebody else could be mitzi you. Why? Says the Chavetz Chaim a very interesting thing, and he quotes this from the Magen Avraham. The Kriyas HaMegillah heavy k'may tefillah. The din of Mikra Megillah is similar to the din of davening Shemona Esrei, the be'inon asara dafka. By tefillah, in order for a shliach tzibur to be mitzi other people who know how to daven with their tefillah, you need a kehillah, you need a tzibur of 10, and the chazan has to be a shliach tzibur. But if you don't have a tzibur of 10, then you don't have a tzibur that could make a shliach tzibur. If you don't have a tzibur, then a chazan cannot be mitzi somebody else with his tefillah. Why is that? So the truth is, if we take a look at Hilchos Rosh Hashanah in Siman Tavkuf Tzadik Dalid in the Mishnah Berurah's words are, "De tefillah tzarich kol echad levakesh rachmim al atzmai." What is tefillah? What is davening? Shemona Esrei is you're standing in front of Melech Malchei Amlochim Kudsha Brichu. You're standing in front of Borei Olam, and you're beseeching Borei Olam. You're asking Borei Olam for your needs. You don't send a shliach to do that. You have something that you need from Borei Olam. You have to come to Borei Olam, and you have to ask from Borei Olam by yourself. You have to be mevakish rachamim for yourself. You can't ask somebody else to be moitzi you. Now, if there's a tzibur is different. A tzibur has the chashivus. They are a unit. They are a tzibur. The tzibur could send a shliach that represents the tzibur. That is okay. But a yachid, if you're yichidim, each yachid has to be mevakish rachamim on his own. Says the Chavetz Chaim over here that for some reason, and it's very hard to find out exactly what this reason is. For some reason, Mikra Megillah, says the Magen Avram, has the same din, and the Magen Avram says that this is what the Mechaber is basing what he said on. Mikra Megillah has the same din as Tefillah. You know how to lane, you have to lane. You can't have a shliach lane for you and be moitzi you. Maybe it's a question of Presume Nisa. Maybe since Mikra Megillah is an Indian of Presume Nisa, you need to lane it and announce the Nisim yourself instead of having somebody else lane it for you. Very hard to find out exactly why the Magen Avram says this, what he's basing it on. But in any case, this is why the Mechaber says if you don't have a tzibur, if you don't have 10, then one can't be mitzi others. Everybody has to lane on their own. Continues the Chavetz Chaim here in Eis Kat Tezvav. V'hinei Pri Chadash Kasav, the Pri Chadash writes, the Kol Zehu Rak Le'inyan L'Chatchila. However, the Pri Chadash says we should realize that this is only L'Chatchila. Aval B'di'eved, certainly B'di'eved, Im Niskaven Liftar Chaveroi, if one person did lane to be mitzi less than 10 people, Yatsu, they're all Yaitza, Alpha Pisha Kulam Yoidim, even though they are all Bekiyim in their own right, and really they each could lane the Megillah on their own. B'di'eved, if somebody did lane to be mitzi them, they are Yaitza. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Uva Magen Avram mitzadid oid. The Magen Avram continues, and he takes the position that really da'afilu lechatchila odif sheyikra echad lekulan mishum baroiv am hadras melech. The Magen Avram ultimately is not happy with this mechaber, and the Magen Avram says that really the Magen Avram says even lechatchila, if you have less than 10 people, one should be mitzi the tzibur, because that's more of an inyan of baroiv am hadras melech. Even if you don't have 10 people, but if you get together as a group, so far you didn't get together as a group of 10, so you don't have an Ada, you don't have what you need for a davar shebekdusha, it's not a minyan, but you're still a group as opposed to yechidim. And we know that the rule of thumb always is, when it comes to mitzvahs, baroiv am hadras melech. When you accomplish a mitzvah with a group, that's a greater glory for the Rebbeinu Shalom, because now it's a group getting together to do a mitzvah. There's also an inyan of Kiddushay B'Shamayim. It's not just a single yachid doing a mitzvah. So the Magen Avram says, even lechatchila, it's better have one person be mitzi others. However, Chavetz Chaim shows you both sides of the coin. Be'el Yerabba uv'mata Yehuda daitam k'Shulchan Aruch. They take the same side as the Shulchan Aruch. The Kol Echad Yikra La'atzmai, that if you have less than 10 people together and they're all Bekiyim, they should each lane on their own. V'chein he'etik b'derech HaChaim. So writes the Derech HaChaim. If you take a look at the Aruch HaShulchan, the Aruch HaShulchan brings down this halacha of the Mechaber. Then he says, Yesh Cholkim. Did I bring my... Yes, I did bring my Aruch HaShulchan with me. The Aruch HaShulchan says... Kasav Rabbeinu Abeis Yosef, the Mechaber writes, if one person is a baki and knows how to lane, and the rest do not know how to lane, echad paiter is kulam, then one could be mitzi everybody else, because only one is a baki, you have no choice. But if they're all bekiyim on their own, then kol echad kaira la'atzmai, then the Mechaber said, each person should lane on their own, ad kan l'shoina. Explains the Aruch HaShulchan, because apparently the Mechaber holds This idea that one person could be mitzi other people who know how to lane, that's only when you have 10 people, a tzibur, aval shaloi ba'asara, but if you do not have 10, ein echad mitzi chaveroi, one person cannot be mitzi his friends, ela imkein chaveroi, ein abaki likrais, unless they don't know how to lane. And then he continues, umadam ezel tefillah, like the Magen Avraham said, apparently the Mechaber, for whatever reason, is comparing the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah to Shemoneh Esrei, v'loy l'sharei birchas hamitzvahs, and not to other mitzvahs or other brachas hamitzvahs. Aval says Aruch HaShulchan, yesh chalkim bazeh. There are many who disagree with this. The b'chal inyan echad mitzi chaveroi, and they say that one could always be mitzi another. Tehi mitzvah, because Mikra Megillah is a mitzvah, kachal mitzvah, it's like any other mitzvah. Ve'ein zeh davar shebekdusha sheyei tzarech hasara. This is not a davar shebekdusha. It's not like Baruch Hu or Kaddish or Kedusha that you need a minyan. V'adarabba, and quite the opposite, says the Aruch HaShulchan. Bekahai gavna, odiv tvei sheyikra echad lekulan. It is better that one should lay and be mitzi the rest. Mishum b'roivam hadras melech. Ela b'kam makayim im yirtzu yachal kol echad likra la'atzmai. If each one wants to lay it on their own, they certainly can. Kisha ein kanasar, if you don't have a minyan. Because you're not breaking up a minyan. If you have a minyan, then one person absolutely should not break away and lay it on his own. He's breaking the minyan. If you don't have a minyan, if somebody knows how to lay for himself, and he wants to lay for himself, or meg, he could do so. Aval, but, ends off the Aruch HaShulchan, aval loy sheyeh dafke kain, but certainly we don't have to be makpid, that if you have less than 10, each one should lay for himself. Rather, it's an inyan of B'roi v'amahadras melech, one should lay for the rest. And now the key words of the Aruch HaShulchan, v'chein haminig. And that is the minig, that if you have less than 10, even if you have less than 10, one person could be mitzi the rest. Okay. Now we go to the final sif of Siman Tov Reish Pei Tes, top line of Kuf Nun Dalid Amid Aleph, Sivav. Minig toiv lahavi ketanim uketanois lishmaya mikra Megillah. This is a very interesting phrase of the Mechabers that the Bir Halacha has quite a problem with. The Mechaber says it's a minig toiv to bring the young boys and the young girls lishmaya mikra Megillah, to hear mikra Megillah. Before we go to the Mishnah Berurah, let's take a look at the Bir Halacha Dibur HaMaschil minig toiv lahavi. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this is very strange. Hinei Bevadai kavanas hamechaberhu. Certainly, when the Mechaber wrote this, his intent was davka al ketanim shehigiu l'chinuch. Certainly, when the Mechaber says it's a minig toiv to bring ketanim, what kind of ketanim is he talking about? He's talking about ketanim that have reached the age of chinuch, they're higiu l'chinuch, a boy of 6 or 7 years old, a girl similar age, maybe even a little bit younger. So certainly, those are the ketanim and the ketanois that the Mechaber was speaking of. The ketanim be yoser, because if we're talking about children that are younger than that, there's no inyan to bring them. Rak mevalbalin, they only make noise and disrupt the laning. Kabasha kasav Magen Avraham, like the Magen Avraham writes. Now, it says the Chavetz Chaim, now that's very strange. V'im kain, if the Mechaber is talking about children that are higiu l'chinuch, my shaykh minig toiv. What do you mean it's a minig toiv to bring them? Halei medina mechuyev l'chancham b'kriyas hamegillah. Al pi din you have to bring them. If they are higiu l'chinuch, you must bring them, and you must be mechanech them in the mitzvah of mikra Megillah. You have to bring them to shul and train them what it means to come to shul to hear the Megillah. So what does the Mechaber mean minig toiv? So again, the Chavetz Chaim is saying, certainly the Mechaber is talking about children that are higiu l'chinuch. Because if they're younger than that, you absolutely should not bring them, because they're only going to disrupt the Megillah laning. So we must be talking about children that are higiu l'chinuch. If they are higiu l'chinuch, what do you mean minig toiv? It's not a minig toiv, it's a chiyuv l'chinuch. You must bring them. So, says the Chavetz Chaim, ulai, maybe, maybe what the Mechaber means is, if it's only a question of chinuch, you don't really have to bring them to shul. If it's only a question of chinuch, you could lane for them at home, and you teach them that you have to be mekayim the chiyuv of mikra Megillah. So I'm going to lane for you to be mitzi you in mikra Megillah. That would also fulfill the requirements of chinuch. But that's why the Mechaber says, aval kidei lefarseim haynes beyoser, Since the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah is a mitzvah that entails Presume Nisa, and everything that we're trying to do here is to publicize the Nes, therefore, minig lahaviyam bebeis hamedrash, therefore, it's a minig of chinuch, not to just be mekayim your chiyuv of chinuch and lane for them at home. No, be mechanich them to bring them to shul, sheyishbu b'tzibur, train them that they should come to shul to hear the Megillah b'tzibur, kedei lechancham shegam begadlusam yishbu b'tzibur. Train them that there's an Indian of Presumei Nisa by Mikra Megillah. You come to shul and you hear it b'tzibur. You don't just stay at home in your winkel and take out a Megillah and just read it like that. Okay, now let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah Eis Katan Tezayin. Minig Toiv Lahavi. Again, the Mechaber said it's a minig Toiv to bring the children. Kedei lechancham b'mitzvahs Presumei Nisa. And the words of the Mishnah Berurah here at Eis Katan Tezayin flow very well out from this Biur Halacha. Why does the Mechaber say it's a minig Toiv Lahaviam? Kedei lechancham b'mitzvahs Presumei Nisa. To be mechanech them in the Indian of coming to shul to hear Mikra Megillah of Presumei Nisa. Now, here's something very interesting, again, that I think most people don't realize. You ever wonder why we have those psukim in the Megillah that we all say out loud together? Ish Yudi, Haya B'Shushan Abirah, Ushmai Mardechai. We all say it out loud. Why do we all say it out loud? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Umitam Zeh, it is for this reason, for the reason of chinuch, that Noyagin HaKahal Likrois Elu HaPsukim B'Kol Ram. It is for the reason of chinuch that we have the minig to lay in certain psukim out loud. Kidl Kamon, like we're going to see later on, B'Siman Tafrei Tzadik Sif Yud Zayin. Why those psukim? Shehem Iker Haschalas Hanes V'Seifai. Because those psukim delineate the beginning of the miracles of Purim and the culmination of the miracles of Purim. Vehem, which psukim are those? Ish Yehudi, Haya B'Shushan Abirah Shmai Mardechai Ben Yar Ben Kish Ben Ish Yemini. Right? That's when we introduce Mordechai and Esther. Then the pasuk of Mordechai Yotza Milofnei HaMelech, after the hanging of Haman, when Achashverosh appointed Mordechai in his place. So it says Mordechai Yotza Milofnei HaMelech, Mordechai became choshev to the Melech. Then the psukim of La Yehud Emaisai Rav Simcha V'Sasayin Vikar. That's the Simcha Gedolah of Klal Yisrael. Ki Mordechai, and then at the end, Ki Mordechai HaYehudi, because Mordechai Yehudi was Gadol LaYehudim and to the Melech. So these are the psukim that delineate really, the nisim of Purim. And why do we lay them out loud? Comes the punchline of the Chavetz Chaim. Kedei la'orer haketanim. In order to arouse the ketanim, shelo yishnu, so that they should not fall asleep. V'yitnu libam ala kriya, and they should pay attention to the kriya. So we want to make the Megillah, we want to have parts of the Megillah where there's some excitement. So besides the clapping of Haman, I guess nowadays the clapping of Haman keeps the kids awake, and we're going to discuss that in a minute. But we had these psukim that we lay out loud to create an excitement. So says the Lavush. We bring the young boys, the young girls. But says the Chavetz Chaim, don't bring young little children because they disrupt the laning and they prevent people from hearing the Megillah. And we're going to see you need to hear every word of the Megillah. And now you bring little kids who don't know what they're doing, and they cry and they make noise. And so says the Chavetz Chaim, do not bring them. Continues the Chavetz Chaim. Ois Katan Yud Ches, Lishmaya, V'Akshav. Nowadays, says the Chavetz Chaim, Ba'avonoseinu Arabim Nahapachu. I wonder if that was a play on words, since we're talking about Megillah, V'Nahapachu. The Chavetz Chaim says, unfortunately, Ba'avonoseinu Arabim, there's been a bad V'Nahapachu. Nahapachu. Shelevad she'enam shoymim. Forget we bring kids who don't listen to the Megillah. Elohim Mavalbalim. They make a whole grida. They make a whole disturbance. Shegam agdolim einam yechelim lishmaya. That even the adults can't hear the Megillah. V'chol biyasam hu rak lahaka, says Haman. And the only reason the kids come is to show off their costumes and to bang Haman. And through this, says the Chavetz Chaim, a father is not being mekayim his chiyuv of chinuch at all. To bring your 7-year-old, your 8-year-old, your 9-year-old to shul in a bunny rabbit costume with the biggest cap gun or the biggest explosives, in the world, so that he can make more noise than anybody else, and he doesn't listen to the Megillah, and all he's doing is paying attention to his noisemaker and his friends' noisemakers and everything else. You're not mekayim chinuch, you're also disturbing everybody else. Ube'emes, I love these lines here. Ube'emes, in truth, says the Chavetz Chaim, mitzad mitzvahs chinuch, in the context of the chiyuv and the mitzvah of chinuch, tzarich kol av, every father is required lahachzik banav aktanim etzloi, to keep his young children, his young sons, next to him, ulahashgiach aleihem, and to pay attention to them, and to be mashgiach on them, sheyishma'u hakriya, that they should follow and listen to the laning. And when they do reach Haman, the katan is able to go ahead and bang Haman, like the minig is. But that should not be the ikr, the goal of bringing the katan to the Beis HaMedrash. We shouldn't be toifes as a miniach as a ikr, and Tavis as a tafel. We should go ahead and put down the ikr, which is the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah, and just hold on to the tafel, to the haklis as Haman, to the clapping of Haman. So, you're a father and you have young children. Bring your young children that are higiyah l'chinuch to shul. Keep your son next to you. Don't have him running around in the back. Give him a chumash, or if you're looking in a kosher Megillah, have him look in and follow with you. Make sure he's paying attention and he's listening to the Megillah. Tell him this is a mitzvah, Mikra Megillah. We're coming now to be Mekayim a mitzvah. And should you clap Haman? Go ahead, clap Haman in a normal fashion. Kimin Hagai, like the minig is. But make sure that we're Mekayim the mitzvah of Chinuch on the mitzvah of Mikra Megillah. Finally, Ois Katan Yud Tes, Mikra Megillah, says the Chavetz Chaim, Va'achshav, it would be proper for everyone that he should have a kosher, a proper Megillah, and he should lane together with the Balkaira quietly, Mila b'mila, word by word. Why, says the Chavetz Chaim? Because the Chavetz Chaim says nowadays it's impossible to hear from the Shliach Tzibur. Machbas rashu bilbul, from all the confusion. Shamakim be'etzim, they bang with wood and car horns and cap guns and explosives and gragas, who knows? Umashmim koil. V'roi l'chol Yisrael linay kain. The Chavetz Chaim says it's roi for every member of Klal Yisrael to be noyeg, to have a kosher Megillah. Misha yicholos b'yadai, if it's possible. Right now, the price of a kosher Megillah is off the charts. They're outrageously expensive. V'ayin l'kaman b'simin tafrei tzadik sif dalid, where we're going to see that b'diavad, even if you don't have a kosher Megillah, you could be yaitza by laning the words that you miss, even from a printed chumash. Okay, that concludes Siman Tafresh Pei Tes. Let's move on to Siman Tafresh Tzadik. Dinei Kriyas Megillah U'Ba Yud Ches Seifim, says the Mechaber in Sif Aleph. Karei Adam Es HaMegillah, you could lay in the Megillah Bein Oimed Bein Yoshev, whether you are standing or whether you are sitting. Aval, however, says the Mechaber, Lo Yikra B'Tzibur Yoshev L'Chatchila. L'Chatchila, the Balkairei B'Tzibur should not lane sitting down, Mipnei Kavod HaTzibur, because of Kavod HaTzibur. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Bein Yoshev, you could lane sitting or standing. Miu HaBracha Yavarech Ba'amida. However, says the Chavetz Chaim, the brachas of the Megillah, those have to be made Ba'amida. And if you take a look in the Dirshu Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan 1, Dirshu footnote number 1, Miu HaBracha Yavarech Ba'amida, V'chein le'inyan berachas tzitzis. When you make a bracha on tzitzis or yitalis, also it's supposed to be done ba'amida. Kasav HaShulchan Aruch La'el, we're going to get this soon, Yirtz Hashem, Chelik Aleph, Siman Ches, Sheyesh La'imra Ba'amida, the bracha should be made standing. The Kasav HaMishnah Berurah Sham, and the Mishnah Berurah writes over there, Sha'atamu Mishum Shekol Berachas HaMitzvahs Tzricha Liyos Ba'amida. All Berachas HaMitzvahs should be made ba'amida. Now, there's a Shar Tzion over here, Shar Tzion Ois Aleph, Says from the Magen Avram, V'ayin b'machzah shekel, degam hashoymim habracha. Since the shliach tzibur is supposed to make the bracha while he's standing, gam hashoymim habracha, the ones who are listening to the bracha, how are they yotze with the bracha of the chazan? Because of shemeya ka'ina. My listening to the chazan making the bracha is akin to me myself reciting the bracha. Well, if the chazan has to recite the bracha standing, then if your listening is akin to a recital, you have to listen standing as well. So the gam hashoymim habracha kevin the yotzen al yidei shmiya mishum de shemeya ka'ina tzrichin gam kein lamoid. Okay, so what have we seen here so far? We've seen here, laying the Megillah, technically you could lay in the Megillah sitting down. Mimnei kavod tzibur, the Mechaber said, you should lay in the Megillah while standing. Says the Mishnah Berurah, the brachas have to be recited while standing, and from the Machzah Shekel, you have to listen to the brachas while standing. Why? Because brachas ha-mitzvahs are supposed to be made while standing, like tzitzis, like shofar, like sfiras ha'omer. All of these brachas ha-mitzvahs you're supposed to make while standing. Now wait a second. How about the bracha on matzah? Do you have to stand in the middle of your seder to make the bracha al achilas matzah? No. You know why? Because that's a bracha on a mitzvah sheyesh by hanoas haguf. A bracha on a mitzvah where there is hanod to the guf, like eating matzah, you eat matzah, that's an exception. That brachas ha-mitzvah you can make sitting down. But why is it that regular brachas ha-mitzvahs are supposed to be made while standing? So the source for that is a little bit nebulous. There is, the Archas Chaim Rosh brings it down from a Yerushalmi, that brachas ha-mitzvahs should be made while standing. The Archas Chaim gives a few different reasons. He gives one source from Shlomo HaMelech. Shlomo HaMelech, by the Chanukas HaBayis of the Beis HaMikdash, the pasuk says, Vaya'amoid Shlomo, Shlomo stood up, Vayavarech es kol kahal Yisrael. And he made a bracha. He benched Klal Yisrael. He did it standing. So there's a smach from that pasuk that a bracha is supposed to be made standing. Another source is that it says by the Leviim, la'amoid l'sharis, that they stood to serve. La'amoid l'sharis, they stood to do the avodah in the Beis HaMikdash. What's our avodah? Our avodah is mitzvahs. And also, our avodah is what we do with our mouths. Tefillah is called avodah, neshama parim svaseinu. So when you make a bracha on a mitzvah, Archas Chaim Rosh says, you stand. Another possible source is that it's learned out from Sfiras HaOmer. By Sfiras HaOmer, we brought down another reason why you should stand when you make the bracha. And that's because there's a smach from the pasuk. It says, Mehochel chermesh bakama. You start counting mehochel chermesh bakama when you started using the sickle on the standing wheat, bakama. We use the word bakama as a remez that the bracha of Sfiras HaOmer and the mitzvah of Sfiras HaOmer should be done bakama. It should be done when you're standing. Then we learn out from the bracha on Sfiras HaOmer to other brachas ha-mitzvahs that those should also be done while standing. It says lachem by Sfiras HaOmer. It says lachem by tzitzis. So we learn that. But in any case, these are some possible sources why brachas ha-mitzvahs are supposed to be done while standing. Mishnah Berurah is cut in beis. Aval lo yikra. The Mechaber said for the tzibur, you should not lean while sitting. You should stand. Ritzaynoi loymar. Very. Okay, the Chavetz Chaim says, well, again, what did the Mechaber say? The Mechaber said you could lane standing or sitting. Aval, however, lo yikra b'tzibur yoshev lechatchila. Lechatchila, you should not lane for the tzibur while sitting. Why? Because of kavod tzibur. Why did the Mishnah Berurah write this in the negative? Why didn't he write it in the positive? Why did he say, Lo yikra b'tzibur yoshev lechatchila? Why didn't he just say, Aval lechatchila tzarich likroi b'tzibur ba'amida? You should stand. Why did he say, don't sit, lechatchila? Why didn't he just say, lechatchila, you should stand? Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ice cut and bays, Ritzarna Leimer. What the Mechaber wants to say is, De'im kaire b'tzibur, if you're laning for a tzibur, tzarich likroi ba'amida, you have to do it standing. V'ayin bi'er halacha, and look at the bi'er halacha, shetzidadnu da'amida yidei smicha shari le'inyan Megillah. Okay, so says the Chavetz Chaim over here, Ritzoynoi loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, now, whenever the Chavetz Chaim uses these words, Ritzoynoi loymar, it's like I always teach guys, Rashi. When you learn Rashi, learning Daf Yomi, you learn Rashi. If Rashi says kiloymar, the word kiloymar translates as that is to say. When Rashi says kiloymar, what Rashi is doing is, Rashi's pointing something out. Rashi's pointing out to you that really the Gemara says something funny. So there's like a between the lines that you have to divine. Therefore, Rashi comes and he says, kiloymar, that is to say. Why is it written like this? Why does the Gemara say this? That is to say something that you might have missed. That's what the Chavetz Chaim does with Ritzoynoi loymar. The Chavetz Chaim is coming and saying, there's something funny here about the Mechaber. So I'm telling you, Ritzoynoi loymar. I believe that what the Chavetz Chaim is alluding to is what I mentioned. Why did the Mechaber write this in the negative? Why did he write Avaloi Yikra B'tzibur Yoshev L'chatchila? Why didn't he say that L'chatchila B'tzibur Kairei Muhammad? You should lay in standing. Don't tell me what not to do. Tell me what you should do. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Ritzoynoi loymar. What the Mechaber wants to say is, if you're laying b'tzibur, tzarich likroi b'amida, you have to lay in standing. Now, I didn't answer the question yet. Why does the Mechaber write it in such a funny way? Here's the answer. V'ayin bi'er halacha, take a look at the bi'er halacha, shetzidadnu, where we take the position, da'amida al yedei smicha, that if you're standing but you're leaning on something, shari le'inyan Megillah. That's okay for Megillah. We know that when a mitzvah is required to be done by Amida, you can't lean if you're leaning so strongly that if somebody would pull away the thing that you're leaning on, you would fall down. That's not called Amida. That's no longer called Amida. You're not supporting yourself. The thing you're leaning on is supporting yourself. Says the Mishnah Berurah, he brings down over here, he says, take a look at the Bi'er Halacha, where over here, I tell you that by Megillah, Amida al yedei smicha, if you're standing but you're leaning on something, to the extent that if they would pull away the beam and you would fall, that's okay. Now, if you look at the Bi'er Halacha, I'm not going to read it inside, but just look, the first three words of the Bi'er Halacha, Dibra Maschav lo yikra b'tzibur meyoshev l'chatchila, hine b'mate Yehuda. He brings down the Mate Yehuda. The Mate Yehuda says that Amida al yedei smicha is mutter by Megillah, and he derives it from the Mechaber. You know why? Because he says, why did the Mechaber tell me, Avaloi Yikra B'tzibur Yoshev? Why didn't the Mechaber say, you have to do it Muhammad? You know why, says the Mate Yehuda? To give you a remez that you don't really need Amida. If the Mechaber would have said, you have to do it Muhammad, oh, then you have to do it Muhammad. If you have to do it Muhammad, you can't do it Al Yedei Smicha. That's not called Muhammad. Says the Mate Yehuda, that's why the Mechaber wrote, Avaloi Yikra B'tzibur Yoshev. L'chatchila, you shouldn't lane for a tzibur sitting. But Amida al yedei smicha, that's okay. So the Mate Yehuda says, the Mechaber hinted this to us. Question is, why is that taka the case? Why is it that by Megillah, Amida al yedei smicha is okay? And what the Bi'er Halacha says over here is, he says, I'll tell you why. He says the truth is that there's a Mishnah in the Gemara and Megillah. I don't have a Megillah up here, but there's a Mishnah in the Gemara and Megillah. The Mishnah says you could lay in the Megillah Bein Oimed Bein Yoshev. That's a Mishnah. The Gemara right away in Chaf Aleph Amud Aleph says Mashe Ein Kain BaTorah. Megillah, you could lay in Megillah standing or sitting. Says the Gemara, Mashe Ein Kain BaTorah. Not Torah. Torah has to be Ba'amida. But, says the Mate Yehuda, but the halacha, says the Bi'er Halacha, but the halacha by Kriyas HaTorah is that it's only lichatchila that you have to stand. B'di'evid you yoytze even if you sit. So, again, the Mishnah says, Megillah, Bein Yoshev, Bein Oimed. The Gemara says, Mashe Ein Kain BaTorah. BaTorah, you need Amida. But by Torah, you only need Amidah l'chatchila. So if by Torah, you only need Amidah l'chatchila, and then by Megillah, it's Bein Oimid Bein Yoshev, so Megillah is less than Kriyas HaTorah, that means that by Megillah, even l'chatchila, you don't need Amidah. So this idea that you need Amidah for Mikra Megillah at all, says the Bir Halacha, is only a minig. It's only a minig l'chvayid hatzibur. It's not a requirement on any level. So when the Mechaber says Aval Yikra b'tzibur yoshev l'chatchila, he doesn't mean that l'chatchila you have to stand. No, it's only a minig mipnei kavod hatzibur to stand. B'diavad you sat, fine, but because there's no requirement of Amidah, even l'chatchila, smicha Amidah al yidei smicha, standing but leaning, is okay. Okay. Let's just do the Ramah. So we're going a little bit late. Let's do the Ramah, and we'll do Mishnah Berurah is Gimel. Says the Ramah, very fascinating halacha haga. Va'asa lachazan likrayas Megillah ad she'omrim lo'kra. The Baal Koreh is not supposed to lane the Megillah until the tzibur tells him kra, lane. Says the Mishnah Berurah, what does this mean? The lahoitzi at tzibur hu inyan covered. To be the Baal Koreh to mitzi the tzibur and the achiv of Mikra Megillah is a kibud. Mechubed, Rav Pliny to be the Baal Koreh. It's not just you don't have no right to go to the bima and take the bima. The tzibur has to be mechabed you. Vein royal adam lachle covered latzvay calls van shalekim do. But says the Chavetz Chaim v'chol zeh bein kavua lekach. This is only if you're not the Baal Koreh. Aval b'shliach tzibur kavua. If you're the Baal Koreh, shebinuhu lekach. You are already appointed as the Baal Koreh. Ain't tzarich lahamtin. You don't stand there by the bima and say, "Well, I'm waiting for them to say start." No, if you're the Baal Koreh, when it's time to start. But you don't have the right to walk up to the bima and appoint yourself Baal Koreh. Okay, thank you so much for joining me for limudHaTorah. The schus of limudHaTorah should be making against Klal Yisrael. The Rosh should send Yeshua Sefurus Parnasset Sheduchim to all those in need. We should be zeicher to see the Bias Gal Tzedek. B'meher v'yameinu. Amen. Be well.